to live a whole and complete life. Not because today we're talking about releasing the pain, not releasing the will to live. If you grew up in divorce or chaos, people may have told you, you just need to move on, forgive, let it go. But every time you try, something inside you screams and says, I'm betraying myself. If I let go, then what happened didn't matter. Today, we're going to talk about why letting go feels like betrayal when your first home collapsed, and what I call the chimney of your life, where the pain of what you survived can go through you without forgetting why you survived in the first place. If you're in a place where letting go sounds like letting go of your life, please screenshot the crisis info in the description below. Because today, we're talking about releasing the pain, not releasing the will to live. I love you. Alright guys, as you know, we've been going through the house framework these last few weeks. And if you've been with us, we always like to do a quick recap because we understand that this verbiage is unique to us. And we want anyone who has a newcomer to the videos to be able to understand what it is we're talking about and why. And so as always, what we want to do is recommend that you go watch our explanation of the wholeness framework. This is the building a homing framework that we walk people through to live a whole and complete life. Not perfect, but whole. And so we believe we've absolutely cornered exactly what is required for wholeness. And obviously this is for everyone, but we bring this to you if you're a person who came from divorce or from chaos or from abuse in your childhood that led you to making bad decisions or didn't equip you per se to be successful like your classmates, like your friends, like other people in your life. And obviously, we want to be able to help as many people as we can, but we have to focus on our niche. That is what makes any message powerful. And so, what the framework is 7 different things, what we call building a home. It is the BHI framework. And so, what you have to start with to live a whole life is a foundation, right? Because if to build, you must build up. There is no building down, right? And so, how it works is first, your foundation is love and truth, and we have a video explanation on that. Your basement, which is your identity and your integrity, right? Who you are and discovering who you are, and then acting out who you are to the best of your capability on a maximum level each and every single day. That's what makes you an integritous person. And then your first story of the house is your physical and your financial health. Very important. The second story of your house is your vocations. So the things that you are personally called to do in your life, aka what in personal development they call your purpose. And then you have the attic, which is your hobbies or joy, right? That was last week's video. If you want a great explanation as to what we define as joy, what we define as your hobbies. Obviously, there are universal definitions of that, but we have our little spin on it. And then, of course, this week, we come to the chimney. And the chimney of the house is the thing that lets all of the smoke rise and get out. Because if the chute is closed, meaning there is no way for smoke to release from that fire that is burning within you, then the whole house gets filled with smoke, everyone suffocates and dies. So yourself, the people that are closest to you, that you care about. And so the chimney is about releasing that smoke. It is forgiveness. And most importantly, the 2 most important things is releasing the people and the things that don't serve the remaining parts of your house that were aforementioned, right? Because we really do a good job as human beings of holding on to things that don't serve us well. I think it is just a part of our psyche. Um, and most importantly, I think it is a necessary placeholder or indicator of growth in your life. If you start to become a person that is able to release both people, events, feelings, ideas that don't serve your specific purpose in life, then I think you're on your way to becoming a very powerful person. And so, obviously, we want to get into all of that, why we think it's important. Obviously, someone who's come from a traumatic background, having dealt with abuse in many different ways, and surviving a suicide attempt on my own life in 2012, the Chimney has been an absolute paramount addition to my life, and how has it allowed me to move forward despite the things that have happened. Because if you have come from divorce or traumatic childhood, these things can be very, very, very hard and difficult, not only to process, but to make good use of. And we don't want anyone to have wasted their potential in any way, shape, or form. Because the truth is, if you dealt with trauma in your childhood, it was not fair. And the only way to not become an evil person, right? Someone who wants to destroy this world because of having suffered, is to learn to release and then make good use of it, to become a master of your own suffering, to embrace it, to tap into it, because your worst pain is someone else's ultimate healing. And we definitely think that that is the only way to put trauma to good use. That is the only way it is redeemed. Not only if you as the individual are able to move on and live a life despite your start in this world being an absolute garbage heap, being a quote unquote less than member of society, then the next best thing after that would be to help someone else who is in pain, who is struggling with the very things that you have survived from. But you can't do that until you are able to come to a point of forgiveness of the abusers in your past and the very release of the desire to be negative with the negative feelings that are within you already. And so I definitely think that this will resonate with a lot of you if you're still at that stage where you're working on it. And let me make no mistake by telling you that it is a work in progress, because the worse the trauma for any individual, the harder it is to learn to let it go. I still am working on that every single day. I mean, there are days that I wake up and I'm just like, as I learn more about psychology and neuroscience and success in general, what it takes to be successful as a human being on a base level, what it takes to be successful in business, what it takes to be successful in a marriage, what it takes to be successful in friendship, it gets very daunting, because I look at all the things that I deal with and that I've dealt with and that I will deal with in the future, I'm sure, and it just seems like it's an insurmountable odd. It's the mountain peak that could never be transversed. You know, it seems like it's a never-ending corridor of darkness and death. But the best thing to do is to take it one step at a time, day by day, with intention. Because if you've dealt with trauma, your survival responses, in which most likely you are living on every single day of your life, are not only unsustainable for yourself, but unsustainable for the world around you. And living in survival will lead you to a life of despair. And when you live in despair for too long, you will no longer want to live. I mean, it is a fact. And everyone has a different threshold, everyone has a different capacity for their amount of time in despair. Mine personally was from, in utero to 27 years old. So I lived for 27 years with very minimal positive forces and very maximal negative forces. Does that mean there was zero positive in hindsight? Absolutely not. There were definitely people in my life at certain stages of my life that have impacted me greatly. Good choices that I had made that impacted me positively, but unfortunately, a lot of my childhood and those first 27 years of my life into my young adulthood were not that great. And since still being on the tail end of that, it can feel like I have this monster chasing after me sometimes. But regardless, when you make the decision to start that climb, to aim upward, it is one of the best things that you can do. And so I want you to know first, before we get into the video and how the psychology and the neuroscience and the spirituality of forgiveness and release matters, I just want you to know that I'm so very happy that you're here and that it is possible. And as much as it feels like it's impossible right now, that is just your brain responding in survival as you've been taught. So your brain is responding intelligently. When you think of a world beyond your pain, your brain is responding intelligently, trying to suppress that because your brain doesn't want you to be let down. Your brain doesn't want you to start on something good and then fail. But here's the thing, is that every single time you fail, you are a percentile better than the person you were when you first started on your journey. And every single person on planet Earth has the capacity to be a winner. I believe that to the very depths of my soul, because not only have I started to win, but I know people who have had similar or worse trauma than myself that are currently winning. And so if you have no one in your life to be able to tell you that you can do it, I want you to hear me right now, loud and clear. You 100% absolutely can. And so that is the spirit in which we move forward in all of our videos. Even today, I had a rough week this week. There were some familial issues that my wife and I had to deal with, and that is part of that partnership. In good times and in bad times, in sickness and in health, till death do us part, right? And so I didn't want to really record today. I didn't want to really be productive and do the things that I am supposed to do while I'm on this upward aim. But I've learned more and more, because Alex Hormozy says it eloquently. He says, you can feel like shit, but you don't have to act like shit. How you feel doesn't have to define your behavior. And when you start to get that emotional distance and that distinction, which is something that they teach in psychology, distancing yourself from how you feel, not a disconnection, right? Because you don't want to parcel it out. You don't want to not understand how you feel at all. You want to distance yourself from your reaction to how you feel. You want to be able to become a person that can sit in your feeling, allow it to move through you, allow it to take its course, and you want to become that silent observer of self first. and it not in a lens of judgment, but curious grace. Because then if you can start to analyze yourself with curious grace and understand why you have certain feelings and why you have certain reactions, then you can have clarity, and clarity brings awareness. And then once you're aware, you have the opportunity to start making different choices. It's not an automatic byproduct, but it is an opportunity to start making better choices. And so, with that in mind, let's get into the chimney. Let's get into why it's important. And hopefully by the end of the video, you walk away with the capacity to start releasing the people and things that don't serve your specific purpose in life. So first things first is we want to define the chimney. And so the chimney of your house, right, is where what's burning inside you has somewhere to go. Every house needs a way for heat, smoke, and pressure to escape. So the whole structure doesn't fill up and suffocate the people inside. You can suffocate yourself, and you can suffocate the ones that are closest to you, the ones that love you. And so in your life, the chimney is how you release grief, anger, resentment, fantasies of revenge. So I used to have those as well. Unrealistic expectations without denying what happened. So this isn't about pretending that it didn't hurt. The chimney is how you let what happened move through you, as I said earlier, instead of living in you forever. And I want to just talk about that for a second, because I grew up with a very abusive, narcissistic, sociopathic, addictive, convicted felon of a father. And he was a master of his class in terms of manipulation. He knew how to break, bend, mold, and he constantly moved the goalpost since I was a child. And a lot of the adverse things that occurred to me while I was a child were as a result of his decisions. And obviously, I made decisions later on that adversely affected my life. But those decisions were in part informed by the trauma that I had sustained as a child. And so, he has probably been my greatest source of trying to learn how to forgive. Because it doesn't make sense. There is no logic behind a person who's supposed to love you and protect you becoming your greatest source of pain. It shouldn't be that way, ever. But unfortunately, it happens every single day. The cycle of trauma moves through families like nobody's business. And the only way to get to that point of forgiveness is to make the decision that you don't need that hate, that resentment, that unforgiveness towards that individual, because it doesn't serve your purpose in this life. And it's not about reconciling with that person. I want you to understand that forgiveness does not mean that you have to trust them again or place yourself in another environment with abuse and danger. But what it means is that you're no longer going to allow it to kill you. And it's, again, very difficult. Even talking about it right now, I feel like this weight in my chest because I know how hard it can be to do it. And it probably seems very far-fetched, especially if you were abused in a way that left you with permanent scarring, whether it be mental, emotional, or even physical. And it could force you to question a lot of things. It definitely made me question my worth in life. It made me question why live in the first place. Definitely made me question what real love is, and I probably didn't even know what real love was. I would say until after my suicide attempt. Yeah, I mean, 3 years ago. It makes you question God's existence. If, as you know, we're a theistic company, I believe in the monotheistic God of the Bible, and it definitely forces you to question his character, question why would a loving God allow such atrocities to happen in my life personally. And I only have one answer to that question, and it may not even be the right answer, but it's the only answer that I can have that allows me to want to continue going on a daily basis, because there is just no wrapping around why things happen to me in the way they did unless it is with this specific answer. And I'll definitely get into that in a few seconds. But I just wanted to define the chimney and define perhaps some of my own struggles still, and your own apprehension maybe to even the topic. I just want you to know that I understand completely, because at the same time too, every single abuser in your life or mine, they don't deserve to be forgiven. They do not. The pain that has been caused for both you and I is very real, and nothing and no one can make that pain less significant because of how great it adversely affected your life. But I believe it can be redeemed. And so forgiveness is not for the person that hurt you. It's for yourself. In fact, it may seem odd, but it's the greatest act of self-care that any one individual on planet Earth can do. To forgive and to release is 100% for you. It's not for anybody else. And so when you broach the topic with that mindset, I believe not only will it help you immensely, but it will allow you to touch other lives and other people. So let's get into it. So first I want to talk about why letting go feels like betrayal after childhood divorce or trauma. Because what happens usually is there is a loyalty to the pain that is baked into your nervous system. Because the loyalty to the pain equals loyalty to people. And so as a kid, you may have felt that if you stop being sad or angry about what dad did or what mom did or what said individual did, you're letting them off the hook. Or if I forgive mom, I'm saying what she did was okay. And so the pain becomes a way of staying connected to the story, a way of staying loyal to the parent who was hurt. So if you have pain from one parent hurting another, or you have pain from either of your parents or loved ones, or even strangers having hurt you. And so, for a lot of kids of divorce, the pain or anger feels like the last thread trying tying you to the truth of what happened. And I definitely felt like that for a very long time. Because, like I said, unfortunately, my father was the abuser in my life. I was hurt by my mother, but a lot of the hurt that I experienced at the hand of my mother was because she also was a broken person that had been utterly abused and mentally destroyed by my biological father. And so some of the things that I went through with my mother were a direct byproduct of what she had gone through with my biological father. So, and I didn't realize that for a very long time. That took a long time to process because my biological father had basically indoctrinated me against my mother since I was a child. He would, from a very young age, tell me what he believed to be all the worst things about her. He would tell me that she was out to get him, out to get us, being he and I as a son, that she was constantly, for the rest of our lives, going to try to ruin he and I's relationship, that any hardship that he had to go through was her fault, which obviously was a complete lie from the pits of hell. He just was very good at doing what he did, which was protect himself first and foremost above everyone on planet Earth. And he was his sole focus from whatever age to the time that he died. His life was about himself. And eventually, his life fell apart. He died broke and alone 3 years ago in 2022 of November. He died, and he was young. He was only 56 years old. And I won't say it's a matter of like he got what he deserved, but in a way, yes, because when you go around abusing the world, which there are very few people in his life that have good memories of him. He negatively impacted almost everyone he ever met, except maybe a passing stranger or, that one night stand. So, he did die sick, alone, broke, and it gave me a lot of perspective when that happened. But what I had to realize over the years, and it was very hard to forgive him because he never had the capacity to acknowledge his own death that he doled out. I mean, he believed himself to be without blame. That was one of the things that he was very good at. You would try to engage in a meaningful, reconciling conversation with him, and before you knew it, he would flip it on you, and you would walk away from the conversation feeling like you're the asshole, and you don't even remember why you started talking to him in the first place. And so it was very hard. So for many years of my life, I just didn't talk to him at all because there was no point, and there was no closure between him and I. Pretty much, I don't remember any times that he said sorry or took ownership from what he did. There are other people that he spoke to before he died, and he told those people that he dropped the ball with me, and those people expressed to me at his funeral and at the time of his death, that he had regretted so much this, that, and the other. But I never had that conversation with him, and so I had no closure whatsoever. There was just a mountain of pain and then his death. And so it really made me want to just be angry. You know, I just wanted to be angry because, the person that's supposed to love you and protect you, which is the role of a father, is to provide and protect. He was the one, and I was his only son with my mom. Information came out later that he might have had other children around the world. He was a serial womanizer and he's traveled all over the place. So that's a whole thing. There's a whole family that I haven't met and things like that. But yeah, I never. So he and I was his only son with my mother, and so that was very hard to reconcile, you know. And like I'm still working on it because as I go through my own healing process, there are things that I remember that were suppressed memories, or things that I will go through even in life on a daily basis that will trigger those wounds. And I will think of him, and it can take me, sometimes I can recover very quickly, just in a few minutes, and I credit that to the work that I've put in, and I credit that to the healing process in which I've embarked on. Obviously, I give credit to my faith-based journey, my encounters with God as a universal force of love, and coming to understand him as a quote unquote heavenly father, and then just understanding trauma in general, having, studying psychology, studying neuroscience, studying the nature of trauma, knowing that he was an abuser because he had been abused. Learning about his parents, my grandmother and my grandfather, understanding that they abused the living daylights out of him, and he was a better father than his father was to him, but the bar was set only a few inches off the ground. And so regardless, just being able to get to the point to admitting that has been difficult, but that it is the truth. Like, after finding out about my grandfather, his father, which I never knew him because he died like a year before I was born or something like that. He was a better father than his father was to him. But again, he was still the worst possible father that I could ever have. And that's not to have a pity party for myself, but it's to understand that the facts of what happened to me are real, and I no longer have to be held captive by the idea that it was possibly my fault. And for many years of my life, I believed that it was all my fault, that somehow me breathing was a problem on planet Earth. And if you were to talk to an evolutionary biologist, then I lost, right? As far as natural selection went, my ranking on the societal list started low and was very low for a very long time. And I mean, I am privileged to be in the top 1% of the world's wealth, meaning I make more than $30,000 a year. I'm not six-figure earner as of yet, but obviously the plan is to get there and much more. But regardless, though, that is my thoughts on why it's so hard. And I wanted you to understand my personal side of that, so that if you're struggling right now, having been abused in a myriad of different ways by your parents specifically, and the effect is slightly different if it's coming from your father versus it's coming from your mother. The impact on your psyche, there is slight variations to it because of the roles in which different parents play for their kids and the proximity of your relationship with that person at the time of the abuse as well. There are several varying factors, but regardless, the answer to the question which I posed earlier is that why would this happen to me, or why would this happen to you? The only one that logically makes sense, and I factor into my logic the capacity to continue living, because like I said already, I did attempt suicide in 2022, and since then my barometer for continued living is very specific. If there is no good, if there is no God, if there is no redemption, if there is no reconciliation, if there is no purpose to the pain, then truly the life that we are all living is not worth it. And so, as Alex Hormozy says, we all suffer in this life. So make sure that the thing you are pursuing is worth all of the suffering. Right? And so, I necessarily want to be a serial entrepreneur, as he has become a venture capitalist, someone who invests in businesses and educates the world on business, even though he is a mentor in my life and a person that has changed my life for the better 100%. Do have entrepreneurial goals and dreams, and I don't put a cap on what I can do. I'm going to continue growing until I die. That is one of the decisions that I made, and I think that is the only thing that is worth living for. And so, to be able to live as an upward aiming person, you have to be able to release and forgive and realize that that was the purpose of your pain, to empower you to become who you were created to be. And that may seem like a wild statement, but here's the thing: to live a whole life, you must have a life also that is focused on helping others, right? Because if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go with people. And so, and the whole one man island thing is absolute farce. Trying to go it alone led me to where I ended up. And so, it can only help you for so long until you reach your pain point, right? Till you reach your threshold. And like I said earlier, everyone has their own threshold. But the point being, that is what makes it difficult for a child from a child a person who experienced trauma in their childhood to let go, because either the purpose is lost, or loyalty to an individual who was hurt by someone else that you love is lost. But that's not true. Okay? And so what ended up happening was that my anger protected me. Most of the time, that's what it is for you. So anger was a boundary where no adult stepped in. It was proof to myself that what happened to me was wrong, that I didn't deserve it. And so letting go of anger feels like you're dropping your shield and you're inviting more harm. But it's not true. And so, also, We have a fear of being gaslit again most of the time. So if you were minimized, meaning people had told you that whatever happened to you wasn't that bad, right? That's a form of gaslighting. Or if you were blamed, meaning people have told you you're too sensitive, that's another form of gaslighting. Or used as the go between, right? Which is tell your father this or tell your mother that, right? And unfortunately, I dealt with all three of those. So what happens is then you fear, if I release this, I start telling myself the same lies that they did. But here's the thing, it's not true. By releasing it, you actually get your power back. And also, what probably happened was that your identity has been built around hurt, right? When you've carried, I'm the one who got left, I'm the one who had to grow up early, I'm the one who keeps the score, right? Letting go can feel like, who am I if I'm not the one who was hurt? And it's a very important question. It's a scary question, right? But aiming in that direction would be the most noble thing that you could possibly do for you. Not only does God, as the universal force of love, want you to do it, so that would be what in religious terms they call being in his will, but it's the best thing for you would be to start asking that question, who am I if I'm not the hurt person? Right? And I'm definitely not fully there because you just heard me explain for 20 minutes how I'm still working through it. But I'm now willing to ask that question. I'm now moving in that direction. I'm discovering the person that I've always had the potential to be. And you can do the same thing. And so, children of divorce often feel like they're being asked to choose between their healing and their truth. And remember, my truth or your truth is not your opinion, it's that what's true about you. Every single thing that's true about you. Now, it has to line up with what's observable in the universe, what's measurable by science. Otherwise, it doesn't have a parameter. But regardless, you don't have to choose between your healing and your truth. In fact, your truth is what will lead you to your healing. So it's not as if you can only have one. But the traumatized brain, the traumatized mind, it hyper focuses on only one solution. Most of the time, for a person who's been traumatized, there's only one way to get out of this. Right? And that's what happens when you start to deal with suicide ideation, is that your options for living start to condense until you reach this focal point to where you believe the only possible option that you have is to take your own life. And so that's trauma-based thinking. And it applies not just to suicide, but to a plethora of everything else, right? If you're a person who, tries one thing and then that one thing doesn't work, you give up immediately. That's a trauma response. That's a survival response because your brain, your body doesn't want you to go through pain again. But it is learning to embrace that pain, to become the master of your own suffering, is what gets you to that other side. And so there are costs to what happens when there's no chimney, right? Emotionally, pressure builds, right? Little triggers cause big explosions, or you go completely numb. You just suppress it and depress it all, and you stop feeling whatsoever. And again, it's to protect yourself, but to live by protecting yourself is not really living. That's just survival. And you can only go in survival for so long. And so relationally, what happens is that new relationships pay for old damage. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, I'm talking about friendships as well. It can be very hard, right? Because you're carrying all of that forward into your dealings with the next people. And what happens most of the time, and it was very hard for me to admit this, but I have to tell you guys because I love you, is that your friends or your romantic partners end up paying for the sins of someone in your past. Okay? So you overreact or underreact because you're still in old battles, right? Or you punish yourself instead of the people who hurt you. And physically, this ties back to the first floor of the framework, right? Is that your body carries the load, right? We've described what has happened to the nervous system with trauma. We've described what happens to your limbic system, to your neurological system, right? I mean, there's so much new data and evidence and science coming out explaining the body's biological, physiological response to trauma. It's insane. But what happens is you carry the load. And so any pain or trauma that is not dealt with will manifest itself physically, right? So now there is more than ever overwhelming evidence that the mind and the soul, right? Heart, mind, soul, the inward being, that inward person, the ethereal, the mystical, right, is definitely connected to the body. Otherwise, why would we feel just based off of people, places, or things? So the immaterial has an effect on the material, right? And again, there's obviously this has been talked about by people who follow a spiritual life for millennia now. But as time goes on, the science more and more is pointing to immaterial affecting the material, especially with emotion and the body, with the mind and the body. They are not separate. They are 100% connected, because you'll get headaches, you'll get tension, you'll have stomach issues, you'll have chronic fatigue, right? A person who's depressed wants to sleep all the time. That was me as well, right? And yeah, I mean, as we've talked about, Bessel van der Kolk, one of the greatest voices of our time, in my opinion, right? I'm in the process of reading his book, The Body Keeps the Score. So, not embracing the pain and going through the journey of forgiveness has a personal cost. So, that person hurt you, and then now you're hurting yourself. Imagine that. You become victim twice over. Very hard. But anything in this life that's worth doing is hard. And usually the hard thing is the right thing. And so that's when you start to take your power back. That's when you are no longer a victim of the abuse or of the abuser. You become a person that's empowered. You can become a person that leads. Because when you speak, you'll be able to speak from authority. Most people don't have depth and weight. I have trouble connecting with people who haven't suffered, because they don't know what the shit side of this life looks like. And to be honest, I don't really care. Because no one could never take criticism or advice from anyone who has not been able to construct the things that you have walked through. Period. End of story. Because they have no idea. Sympathy and empathy are miles apart. Empathy comes from where you are right now. I've been there. Sympathy is just, I feel bad for where you are right now. So, without a chimney, The whole house fills with smoke. You can't breathe. You can't see clearly. And eventually, you start to wonder if burning it all down would be easier than trying to ventilate it. And so, there are common coping mechanisms people don't even realize: overworking, addictions, compulsions. I'm sober 10 years as of this year. I was a drug addict and alcoholic. That was one of my maladaptive coping mechanisms. But when you read the neuroscience, it was actually intelligent. It was my brain's way of keeping me alive until the thing that I was doing to keep me alive started to kill me. I did so much drugs and alcohol that I started to develop seizures. And then no one wanted to do drugs and alcohol with me anymore because I would seize and pass out. It wasn't cool anymore. One time I was with all my buddies in his home at the house, and I seized out and hit my head on the bathtub in his bathroom. And we were all high, so they weren't going to call the ambulance because we were all afraid that I was going to get in trouble. I woke up a few minutes later, thank God. But what if I hadn't? Right? So self-harm, right? Self-cutting. I have a few scars. Suicidal ideation. People don't like to talk about these things, but they're very real. And it doesn't make you weird. It just makes you a person in pain. And I empathize with you. If I were with you wherever you are right now, I would just give you the biggest fucking hug in the whole world. Because I look back to how I was living and where I was. And I would never wish that on my worst enemy. Or you're a person that creates constant drama to vent pressure. Here's the thing. Because of the nature of trauma, like we've previously described, it's not the event in itself, it's the wound that you sustained as a result. And any wound has the capacity to be healed. And so you can rebuild your chimney. But you have to set expectations. Right? Everything has to be realistic. Can't be fantastical. So this isn't about just forgive and move on. These are slow, honest bricks for release. One at a time. One at a time. And it's not about being perfect with it either. It's about just putting the work in. And it's not spiritual bypassing or pretending like, oh, God will heal me. Yes, He has the capacity to heal. But I think a miracle only happens to a person He's trying to reconcile. But once He's reconciled you, meaning that you embrace a living, breathing relationship with Him in His character, which is a universal force of love, that is what empowers you to start moving forward. It then becomes on you. And He's there. He's always there. Right? Love is always there to propel you forward. But you can't just say, oh, God will heal me, and you don't give Him the capacity to help you move through it. It's not how it works. So, brick one is you have to name what actually happened. And you have to be concrete, right? My parents divorced when I was 8. That's my story, right? I was put in the middle of adult problems. I felt abandoned, used, invisible, blamed. So write it down in plain language. Not softening to protect anyone, No exaggerating it to prove it. It was bad enough. Whatever it is. Just the truth. Just the truth. Write it down. So the chimney cannot carry what you won't name. You have to name it. Naming something is the first step in the right direction. Right? That popular adage or phrase, they say you can't fix a problem if you don't acknowledge it in the first place. Right? And so brick 2 is to separate forgiveness from reconciliation. Right? And the distinction is forgiveness is releasing your right to keep rehearsing revenge, handing justice to God, time, and reality. Choosing not let this wound be your identity anymore. It no longer has the power to define you or the choices that you make in life. Right? And so reconciliation is trust restored, a relationship rebuilt, which requires safety, change, boundaries, right? And willingness on the other side. So most of the time, the person who was abused will not find reconciliation with the abuser. Like I said, I couldn't have reconciliation with my biological father. But what I could have was forgiveness, because forgiveness is something that I can do. Because here's the thing. You can forgive someone in your heart and still never put yourself in the position to be hurt the same way again. You learned, you adapted, you grew. Right? And so this frees you from feeling pressured to go back into unsafe dynamics. Right? That's why even the Bible, it describes forgiveness and reconciliation are two separate entities. You get forgiven first, and then if there is an opportunity to reconcile, you pursue reconciliation. But reconciliation, like I said, is very specific parameters, and I would never encourage you to reconcile with your abuser, because most of the time the abuser hasn't changed. And I tried, man. I tried a billion times over. And I was just burned by my biological father over and over and over and over again. And he never stopped. And so, some of you, what I suggest is you need to write the letter that you'll never send. That's brick 3, right? It's practice safe, guided release. Some of you need to say it out loud. What you did hurt me. I deserved better. Not to give them power, but to give your pain air. So journaling. I've done more journaling now than I have in my entire life. I'm writing like insane. Not even just about my pain, but in general. Journaling is one of the greatest tools for success. I will recommend it for the rest of my life. Talking with a wise counselor, a pastor, or a therapist. I've done all 3. I have mentors in my life. I have some mentors that are more faith-based. I have some mentors that are just in business. I have some mentors that are just about my personal development. And I've been to therapy. Now, I won't give my opinions on all therapy just yet, because I believe that sometimes it's just the person therapizing you so they can collect their fee and write you that prescription and move on. I think there is real transformational healing work, and it takes special people to do that. But like I said, I have all of those avenues. I have people in my life that I talk to, very few, right? Really, now I can count them all on one hand. 5 people. I don't talk to anyone else because no one else is safe. The only reason why I talk with you guys about it is so that you're not alone, and that you have some reference for perhaps being successful in these areas. Okay? A lot of things is I've lamented in prayer a lot, saying the hard, honest thing to God. I've cried out to God, asking him why he let these things happen to me. I've shook a fist. I've been angry. I've also wept. I've also cried, begged, pleaded. And he's not mad at you for that. So whatever religious nut out there is telling you that God is mad at you for questioning your suffering in this life, it's absolutely ridiculous. Because that's not what love is. Period. End of story. So another thing too is you need to grieve the fantasy, not just the facts. Right? Because you're not only grieving the divorce or the abuse, the fights, the moves, you're grieving the childhood you didn't get. You're grieving the parents they never became. You're also grieving the version of you who thought love meant holding it all together. Sometimes I have moments, like I said, on my healing journey where I just think about my childhood and I'm like, wow, you know. When I realized for the first time what happens to someone's brain when they're traumatized, coming to the realization that the way I operated and how I thought wasn't just by chance or because I was an evil piece of shit, is because my neural pathways were actually formed in a way that were negative to living as opposed to surviving. And so I do sometimes feel bad for myself. I do. I don't stew in it. I don't ruminate. But I have grieved. I have grieved the childhood that I was never able to have. And that's normal. It's completely normal. Now, if you keep doing that and that becomes the sole focus of your day to day, then obviously I think we have another problem. But it is healthy to grieve that, right? Because part of the chimney is also letting the fantasy die. What you wish, what should have, what could have. Because that's not what happened and that's not what is. What is what happened. And you were a child of divorce, you were a child of abuse. That's what happened. But that's also good news. Because the truth is what sets you free. And so the fantasy that one perfect conversation will fix everything, it won't. Or that your parents will finally become who you needed when you were 6, probably not going to happen. And so grief is not betrayal. It's telling the truth also about what will never be. And so number 5 is choose one small act of release. Tonight, I will write 1 page about what I'm tired of carrying. I will forgive my younger self for what they didn't know. I will decide not to stalk an ex or a parent on social media this week. I will bring one specific story to a therapist or a mentor or that one trusted friend instead of handling it alone. Release is a series of tiny decisions. not one big emotional moment. It's bricks placed one on top of another, not fireworks. Now, sometimes those big fireworks moments happen after that small, tiny decision based work is put in. Sometimes I have moments of like complete euphoria and absolute revelation, like, wow, yes. But if you're always looking for the home run, you miss the journey from first, second, and third base. So start making that one small step to move forward. One thing before we close, I want you to understand. So when I talk about the chimney, I'm not talking about letting go of your life. I'm talking about letting go of what's slowly killing you inside, so your life can actually continue. So if you're at a place where letting go sounds like disappearing, that's not a self-help issue. That's a crisis. You are allowed to reach out for immediate help. There is the 988 US number, and there is a global hotline link in the description. Okay? So here's what I suggest for you guys. If you grew up in divorce or chaos and abuse, and letting go has always felt like betrayal, comment chimney and finish the sentence. The thing I'm most afraid of to release is blank. And I want you to know I read these. Every single comment I read. You're not alone in that fear. If you want help rebuilding the whole house, personal, tailored, just for you, including a real chimney, where your pain doesn't have to live inside you forever, I encourage you to join our school community. We're rebuilding together there, brick by brick. If you just need a place to be, alone, while you figure this out, Discord is open. And if you're in that really dark place where you're thinking about ending your life, please use the crisis resources in the description. Join the Discord. Say hello. We'll hang out. We can chat, whatever the case may be. One last thing I want to say to you guys. Your first home may have filled you with smoke, but this house is allowed to have a chimney. Letting go isn't saying it doesn't matter. It's saying it mattered. And it doesn't get to own the rest of my life. This is Thomas Emmanuel Holmes O'Brien. I love you guys.